Communication Studies. These are the institutional, college, and organizations that support not only this event, but also the UNTDebate team. So without their support, we wouldn't be able to not only engage in the public, but really function. So we're deeply grateful for all the support that we receive from those different parts of the UNT system. I'd also like to thank the UNTDebate team. This team is truly a talented and hardworking group of students. They're also the reigning state champs for Texas in debate, so congrats to them. Their time and work has been integral to this event. Abe Hester, especially, who kind of worked with me in organizing this event, did a really great job. So thanks to the UNTDebate team and to Abe for helping me organize this event. I'd also like to thank our moderator and the director of debate at University of North Texas, Dr. Brian Lane. Thank you for your time and coordinating and all of your help coordinating this event. It's been very valuable for me. I'd also like to thank Will Fisher and his excellent campaign staff and volunteers. There are few things more central to a vibrant representative democracy than open, honest, and public discussion between the people and those who either represent them or are fighting for the honor to represent them. Your team's dedication to this event speaks volumes about your dedication to a vibrant democratic participation, and this also speaks to your qualification to represent the people. So thank you very much, and thank you to your campaign. To the audience, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. This is a town hall event, which means that you all will be providing the questions and the content for this debate. So we're very appreciative for everyone who came out to talk about a very incredibly important issue that is education. I'd also like to give a shout out to the College Democrats of the University of North Texas for hosting, let's hear it for them. This student organization is hosting 2 debates on campus in 2 weeks, which is an incredible task. And speaking of which, tomorrow night, the same place, a little different time, they'll be hosting the debate for the Texas House Democrat 64. We hope everyone makes it out to that. I'm sure it'll be an excellent event. It's very exciting for UNT to have another student organization so dedicated to bringing opportunities for public debate and deliberation to UNT's campus. So thank you very much to the College Democrats. So the last thing I'm going to do before we get started, and everything's good? Awesome. The last thing I'm going to do is kind of explain the format here. So we're going to start with a brief kind of introduction from Mr. Will Fisher, his feelings on education policy, basically whatever he wants to talk about, to be honest with you. And then our moderator, Dr. Brian Lane, will take over. We'll be going to the audience with questions, so please start thinking about and preparing questions that you have for Will Fisher, and hopefully especially students and people involved in education will have their questions ready to really get to know our candidates or potential candidates' position on education. With all that said, I'll hand the mic over to Mr. Will Fisher.
Thank you, Gabe, and thank you to the UNTDebate team for debate club, I should say, for making this event happen. I agree with Gabe's sentiments that there's nothing more important to a healthy democracy than that we engage on important topics. And we're here tonight to talk about education. And education, why is that such an important issue that we should hold an entire town hall to talk about it? Well, we live in a post-fact society, they tell us. What does that mean? There is no such thing as alternative truth. There is truth. There is objective fact. Now, maybe you go in your philosophy class and you can argue whether objective truth or objective reality is a thing. But here we're talking about public policy. And when we talk about public policy, it's important from my perspective that we're determining what policy should be based on data, based on truth. It's our educational system that creates citizens, that educates citizens who can make smart decisions. And unfortunately, we have a ruling class, a ruling party right now. I'm a Democrat, so this is not going to be nonpartisan tonight, but that objects or that rejects the existence of objective truth and thinks that policy can be made on the basis of alternative facts, or what you might call subjective truth, or maybe the feels, what feels right. But that's just not acceptable. That's not how we create a healthy civilization. And when we're talking about government, what we're talking about is civilization building. And a lot of times people get into an argument about, well, maybe you should you should have businessmen run our government, because people that know how to run businesses, they're going to be good at running governments, right? Well, civilization building and running something for a profit are two different things. But it's important to me that when I'm engaged in helping to create policy, that I'm doing it from the basis of fact, the basis of data, and the basis of reality. So for that, it's critical to me that we invest in education. Otherwise, you don't have a democracy that's healthy. You don't have a democracy that is voting on its candidates, its elected officials, that's voting on policy in a way that reflects reality. So I wholeheartedly disagree and object to the current administration's approach to public education, which is vouchers. And everybody who here is following the voucher argument, the voucher conversation. They use the term freedom of education, or the choice of education. That to me is just Republican spin for what vouchers really are. Vouchers are the defunding of public education. And when you allow someone to pull their child out of public education, that's fine. Go ahead. I mean, if you want to send your child to private school, that's fine with me. But don't defund the public schools to do it. And that's what vouchers are. Vouchers defund public schools because they remove money from the limited funds that we have for funding public education in this country in order to support that private school education. Well, what you may not know also is that vouchers rarely cover 100% of the tuition of the private school. So who can even afford to use a private school voucher are those who have the funds to pay the rest of it. So it's by design an unequal system that is designed just to support wealthy families sending their children to private school. So I reject it. It's not something that I think as a civilization we want to be encouraging. I want to see us invest in greater amounts in public education, both at the primary level, the secondary education, and post-secondary. And so I'm here tonight to answer your questions. I'm really excited. When I heard this topic, my first thought was an hour on education. Okay. But the more sorry, there's a little shade in that. But the more I thought about it, I thought, this is great, because federal education policy is often overlooked. Education policy in this country, for the most part, is set at the state level. Well, if we had to grade ourselves on how we're doing with public education in this country, and this is a rhetorical question, how would you grade us? So unless that grade is an A or a B+, why do we keep doing the same thing that we've always done? So why is this exciting to me? Because tonight we're talking about federal education policy, which to me should be a chance for all of us in this room to think outside the box. How have we funded education in the past? How have we determined curriculum in the past? And how maybe we can do that differently at the federal level. So thank you for having me here tonight. I'm excited to engage in this conversation, to answer your questions, to share some thoughts with you. And frankly, if I get the opportunity to hear some of your thoughts. So with that, I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fisher. We really appreciate you joining us here for this evening, and appreciate your dedication to education by bringing things out here to the students at the University of North Texas. I've got some privilege of my own, and I'll have to say thank you for our candidate for joining us. Thank you to our audience members. How y'all feeling tonight? Always good to check the house, always good. You've got a number of different policies that you've outlined on your campaign. The UNTDebate team took some time and did some research on federal education policy.
Awesome.
We've got some questions to ask for your opinion, and we're going to be joined by some of the members of the UNTDebate team this evening as well. And then we'll see what the audience is interested in talking about.
Sounds great.
But let me just start us off with a general sort of question, if you will. This is one generated by members of the student body here at the University of North Texas. It goes like this. Given increasing education costs and widening economic disparity, how can we make sure education continues to be accessible to everyone?
Do you want to focus on graduate education, university education, or?
Well, I'll admit that most of our students were concerned with secondary education when they're affording college tuition, but you're absolutely right. Mostly the federal government is involved in things that school choice for primary, K through 12. Whatever you'd like on that.
No, let's talk about post-secondary. So, you're absolutely right that educational costs for college students are soaring, getting out of control. Back in 2000, the average annual cost was just over $8,000. Average annual cost was just over $8,000. 2014, it had gone all the way up to $18,000. That's an increase of about 115%, I think. Wages only increased 1.1% during that time. So there's absolutely a problem with the cost of education in this country. It would be one thing if wages were keeping up. You just call that inflation. But it's not just inflation, it's the cost of the education is going up. There are a lot of things at play here. Just naturally, my brain tends to think about things almost as an economist a lot of times, because we do have an economy that reacts to supply and demand pressures. And in this country, we have created increasing demand for education. And those of you who've taken economics, when demand for something goes up, unless supply keeps up with it, prices are going to go up. And I think that's part of what's happening. It's complex. There's a lot of things going on, but I think that's one of the things that's happening. So how do we address that? From a federal policy standpoint, how do we address that? Well, we need increased supply. So does that mean go out and build a bunch of more universities? Well, not necessarily. So let's think about what are some other things that we could do. I'd like to see us increase vocational opportunities at the high school level and the post-high school level, apprenticeships. I'd like to see us work with unions again to create opportunities for those who want to go into a trade. Part of the demand that we've created in this country is insisting that people go to college who may not, and this is the hard truth and reality of some of the situation, that not everyone is made for college. That doesn't mean I don't support increasing funding for and availability for people who do want to go to college. But it means we need to make other viable opportunities for career development that don't necessarily put that person in a lecture office in Denton. There are other avenues. And so that's the first thing we need to do, and that will lessen some of the, what I call artificial demand for college education. I want to see us, number two, create tuition-free community colleges by 2022.
I think there's some response from the audience on that issue. We've been following that with great interest here at the University of North Texas, sir.
Yeah.
The senior senator from Vermont proposing the Free College for All Act. I wonder if you would give your thoughts on that.
Well, so I'll tell you, I'm a little cautious on jumping straight into on a complete free 4-year education in our country. I know that it works. There are public universities in Germany and in other countries that do this successfully. I want to dip my toe in the water a little bit. And we know that the ROI on a community college education is incredibly high. Costs are low. The return on investment for students is very high. It's something that we can invest in from the federal level and start to get a feel for, well, how successful is this going to be? And why is a community college education, I think, the right way to go right now in terms of funding it on a tuition-free basis? In this country, we've always provided public education, publicly funded, universal education, up to approximately the technology of the day. So if you go back, long time, let's go back 100 years, 80 years ago, when universal public education was up through middle school, and then there was a time when it was expanded to high school, but that has kind of stopped. We haven't continued to expand the level of education that we provide to our population on a universal basis. And there are a lot of things at work there, but a lot of it is the political atmosphere in this country has not allowed it to happen. Well, we have a movement today of taking another look at how are we investing in our own population through education. So I want to see us expand that to a 2-year post-secondary degree. I think that there are a lot of computer, IT type degrees. I want to see us invest in green energy degrees, specialties. That brings a student up to the technology of the day in a way that we haven't done in the past. Then we can take another look in 10 years, maybe less, and say how successful has this been? Has the return on investment been enough to warrant further investment? Meaning a student who gets a community college degree should be paying more taxes later. So this is why we often get stuck in this country on this argument of smaller government, bigger government. Oh, all you want to do is tax and spend. No, what I want to do is invest. I want to invest in taxpayers. Because when I invest in you, you're going to pay more taxes. You're going to pay that back. So I want to see us do that through community college education.
Yeah. Along those lines, I know that part of your platform has to do with tax reform.
Yeah.
And we've been watching very closely the recent tax reform legislation. And at one point, there was great concern on campus that the bill sponsored by the GOP may include scholarships and fellowships as taxable income. I know you're a big proponent of tax reform. How might you address this, not really a conundrum, but issue that the other party has raised, in which you have literally tens of thousands of dollars received that are not taxable income?
Well, I'll tell you what I won't do is I won't take people who own yachts and give them a tax break or a tax handout to allow them to go buy another yacht and to pay for it by taxing graduate students on tuition waivers. So you can rest assured that I'm on the opposite side of the boat there. What I will do is make sure we have fair taxation in this country. And that if you've climbed the economic ladder in this country because of the amazing system we have set up to allow entrepreneurs to succeed, that you will take part in reinvesting some of that back into your fellow community members so they can climb that ladder. And I don't agree, this tax bill to me is these guys having climbed that ladder, some of them generations ago climbed that ladder and they started on top of the roof. And they're kicking that ladder over for the rest of the people in this country who are trying to make the same ascent. What I favor is making it easier for people to climb that ladder. We talk in this country about the American dream, and maybe that idea just flies over your head because you've heard it so many times, but I want you to stop and think hard about what that means. I'll give you a second. What is the American dream to you? What does it mean? The American dream is an idea that if you work, you succeed. It's very simple. That if you put in effort, you see a benefit on the other side. This has mostly been true for white men in this country. I want to make that true for everyone. What I want to do is make sure that we're providing incentives and investments into our own people to allow that to be true. That means removing the barriers that throw so many people off the path to the American dream. Healthcare, education, jobs, fair taxation. So this is part of that whole picture.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me bring our topic on education back to the issue of K through 12 and especially federal involvement with that. You mentioned at the beginning, your opening statement, the debate about vouchers that's going on. And we've just got a general opinion question from our members of the UNTDebate team. Who do you believe is the most effective group to be making education standards?
Who is the most effective group to be making education standards?
Yes, sir. Who should be making education standards?
So I have a few ideas there. One, I want to make sure that we are still allowing our local districts to be, and states, to be making decisions when it comes to curriculum. However, I want to see us establish some federal standards, particularly in the area of STEM education. Because if you're studying science in Arizona, you should be studying the same science, because it's kind of like, it's the same thing, in Delaware and in Wisconsin, right? So if the world goes around the sun in Washington, I want to make sure that you're not learning that the sun is going around the earth in Texas. So,
well said.
So in terms of curriculum,
Yes.
I'm of two minds. I want to see the federal government establish some basic curriculum standards. I don't want to see us connect federal funding to outcomes, though. So I want to make sure that we're staying away from that, because every state has its own challenges in terms of achieving outcomes, and we need to be investing. Even where a school is having a hard time, we need to be investing maybe more. But I want to see us, and then still allow the states some flexibility to determine curriculum. Here in Texas, we learn Texas history. I went to grade school in Oregon. We didn't learn about Texas history. Maybe that's a surprise, but not everybody learns about the Alamo.
Very good. I'm not from Texas either. I have to catch up on my Texas history.
My 11-year-old taught me everything I know about Texas history.
Yes. Many of our students here are very aware of changes going on globally that affect education. And one of our members of the team, Matthew Ellis, asked the question, with public education standards continually falling short of other countries, where are we failing our students? And what do you think are other countries doing that's so much better?
This is going to be an overly simplistic response, but this is a complex question, and I'll tell you where I would hit it at the first instance, which is the way that we fund education in this country is backwards. It's a problem, and it feels a little bit about like banging my head against a wall, because it's a big challenge to fix the way that we fund education in this country. I'm not opposed to fighting for it, though, because it literally means the future of our healthy democracy. If you think about how do we fund education in this country, where does the school that you went to, how did it get funds? Property taxes. And which property taxes? Which properties taxes? Houses. The ones in the area of the school. So if you live in an area, if you live in Highland Park, property taxes are high, you got a lot of revenue, that school's getting a lot of money. If you live in South Dallas, are property tax revenues as high? No. So until we fix how we fund education in this country, we're going to continue to have this problem. Now, funding is not everything, but that's what I want to talk about, because I think it's the first priority. What I want to see us do is, we have Title I in this country, right? Does everybody, raise your hand if you know what Title I is. It's fine if not, I'll explain it. Title I is a federal program, provides federal funds to schools that are in needy areas, okay? Often underperforming schools as well. So they'll be referred as Title I schools. Well, so at this end, let's say you have Title I schools here with property tax revenues that are really low, and then Title I is making up part of the difference. And then you got Highland Park over here. It's not a Title I school. It doesn't need Title I funds. It's got plenty of revenue, but there's a huge gap. There's just a huge gap, and so most students go to schools in that gap. So this is the thinking outside the box that I want you all to do tonight with me. How are we going to bridge the gap between the little bit of funding that a Title I school gets and the funding that a school in a wealthy area gets through property tax revenue? What I want to see, to me, the quickest answer is to expand Title I. To expand Title I to provide more funding both to the schools that are getting it and to broaden the pool of schools that are receiving Title I funds. In some areas, this would get tomatoes thrown at me, because you know what that means? It means further federal funding. It's not something that a lot of states want to hear and talk about, because the federal government has a history of attaching strings to funds. So maybe we need, at the federal level, we need to be more flexible about how we provide funds and the flexibility that we give to states to use those funds. That's maybe a compromise that we need to be willing to make. The other outside the box question I want you to think about is, where does that expanded Title I funding come from? Because, well, just tax more, right? We need to think about where that comes from. Who here thinks in the next 10 years marijuana will be a legal substance nationwide? Is there an opportunity there, maybe? So maybe that's something to think about.
I think I would be remiss in my job as moderator if I didn't ask, are you advocating legalization of marijuana at this point, Mr. Fisher?
I am 100% advocating the decriminalization of marijuana and the legalization for medicinal purposes. The war on drugs in this country has divided families, has ruined lives, and continues to lock up young men and women, mostly who are black. It is used as a tool to target people of color. So you better believe that I'm advocating the decriminalization.
I understand. I appreciate your clarification on
Let me finish the answer, which is,
yes, sir.
Eventually, yes, that is the direction we need to go in, particularly with the opioid crisis that we have in this country. We need to be exploring, we need to at least be studying how can marijuana be utilized as a pain reliever to avoid opioids, which often lead to black tar heroin. This is why education is important, y'all, because we need to be willing to do studies and to take data and to think through these issues and not just follow, well, they said to take this opioid, so I'm going to take that until that runs out. I mean, we need to be thinking outside the box.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But we have some questions from members of the UNTDebate team that they are willing to ask, and they're going to come up now. So let me begin by introducing Mr. Michael Pulver with our first question.
All right. Hello.
Hey there.
This question kind of also personally affects me. I'm a first-generation college student.
Yeah.
Both of my parents live in poverty. And considering that student debt in this nation is a very serious issue for every student, and especially coming from my background, it's something that I'm going to be carrying. And when it comes to my parents, they can't necessarily sign on any loans. It's all for me, right? And it's very difficult to get loans. And even with those loans, it's very also difficult to think about the future for myself. So I guess my main question is, if any, what policies are you planning to pursue to relieve student loan debt?
Yeah, it's Michael. Yeah, thank you for that question. It's one that's personal to me. Well, both my parents did graduate from college. They, like you, were first-generation students. I'm a first-generation graduate student. That was the deal I made with myself. I said, my parents both put themselves through school. I'm gonna do that, and I felt an obligation to take that one step further, and so I went to law school. That was a big part of what drove me to do that. But bless their hearts, my mom and dad worked incredibly hard. My mom was a public school teacher. My dad worked for a heavy equipment manufacturer. They didn't have the nest egg there to send me to college and pay for it. They helped with a lot of things. But I put myself through college through debt. And today I still have over 6 figures in debt. My wife, who's out here, just finished nursing school in May. We put her through on debt. So I feel your pain directly. I'm very fortunate to have a job that allows me to work and pay towards that. But what we've created is a system in this country that allows the haves and the have-nots to have very different outcomes. And it creates, you've seen the ball and chain, and literally those with us with student debt have that ball and chain we're carrying around. Those who come from backgrounds where that's not a need don't have that. It changes the trajectory of life. It changes the trajectory of your options, the decisions that you make, whether to marry, whether to have children. This affects every aspect of a person's life. And we have created, who here has heard the term the peonage of debt? We have created a system where people are slaves to their debt. You no longer go through life thinking about all the opportunities. You go through life thinking about just put your head down and get that next paycheck to be able to service your debt. So it's a real problem, and it mostly affects those who come from backgrounds where they don't have someone who's been able to save for college for them. So first of all, we already talked about trying to reduce create tuition-free community college. That's the first thing that's going to reduce the cost of education. But those of us who have loans, I feel very strongly that graduates should not be paying a higher interest rate than banks are paying to borrow money. There are some realities we have to deal with there. We can crunch the numbers, but banks essentially pay what's called the federal funds rate. Now my friend Matt out there, who's our campaign treasurer, he's probably wagging his finger at me right now. Oh, it's actually this. Anyways, let's refer to it as a federal funds rate. It's a very low percentage. It's basically what a bank pays to borrow money. So what I want to see is a system that allows us to refinance our loans at a rate that is at or just over the federal funds rate to be able to offset the cost of these private institutions for lending money. That's the first thing that we need to do. I'm also willing to engage and look at what a loan forgiveness program looks like. We have to, this is complex, because we have to be willing to accept the fact that private actors in our economy, in our system that is a system of laws, made loans. And they did it without doing a lot of background checking to see whether we'd pay it. And that's because our system says, well, that those loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. This is getting wonky, but hopefully this is a crowd that can deal with the wonkishness. Student loans, if you file for bankruptcy, student loans don't go away. And so we've created a system where the banks say, okay, I'll lend to you because I know that even if you file bankruptcy, you're not going to be able to discharge that debt. So we've got ourselves in a bit of a problem. We need to figure out how to keep the bank solvent while allowing people to get out of some of the student debt that we've put them on. Because we've put them on by saying, you have to go to school, you have to have opportunity in this country. If you want to have opportunity, you got to mortgage that with student loans. And that's that's a lot of inequality that we need to figure out how to deal with as a country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Ryan Wheat.
Hey, Ryan.
How's it going?
I like your shirt.
Thank you. You kind of touched on this a little bit when you were talking about apprenticeships, but I wanted to kind of follow up a little bit more. What policies do you support to encourage businesses to offer tuition reimbursement? Like, for example, you said your wife graduated nursing school, some sort of nursing through maybe hospitals or something like that. So.
Yeah. This is a great question. I want to focus a little bit on healthcare. Is that okay? Because this is an area where we need to both invest in our healthcare system. I want to see us move to a universal system. I have a plan that would allow us to reach to a single payer system. That's what I favor. But that's going to create some trade-offs, right? Because part of that means that a healthcare provider may not be reimbursed or paid at the same level that they are under a fully private healthcare system. What does that mean for healthcare providers who've gone to school, who've taken on $500,000 in debt? It means that we need to think carefully about what we're doing to provide incentives for employers to pay for some of that education. What are we doing to try and encourage those healthcare providers to go work in rural areas? So I see a lot of room for federal public investment. And we can set up programs to allow that employers can take advantage of, that if they will invest in a student's education, in paying down some of those student loans, there could be some tax breaks for them. Businesses get all excited about tax breaks, trust me. So we can think about tax policy and how that's going to allow them to invest in their own workforce. I know that employees who aren't stressed about debt constantly are more creative and more productive and more likely to stick around. Because what you see, I hear employers today complain about millennials. Oh, millennials, they don't stick around, they stay anywhere for 2 years. Well, the truth is we're all riddled with debt. So you hear of another opportunity is going to pay you $10,000 more a year, and you better believe you're going to move to it. because it allows you to service your debt, allows you to start to create the American dream. So employees who aren't riddled with debt are better employees, and we have to help make that case to employers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Takorian Tilly.
Hey, Corey.
How are you doing? So yeah, you mentioned earlier the attack on the black community with the issue of marijuana.
Yeah.
But in recent events, we've seen the president's attack on people of immigration. So with that, I have the question, with Trump's attack on dreamers and students who are immigrants, what policies would you support to aid students who benefit from these programs?
Yeah, so first of all, I support passing a Clean Dream Act. That means no strings attached, making sure that we support dreamers in this country. Dreamers, new Americans who were brought to this country as minors, who didn't have a choice or a say, and often don't know their country of origin. These are Americans. They're as American as you or I. So I support full legalization and path to citizenship for dreamers, certainly initially protected, fully protected, permanent status. That's what we want to see.
Thank you very much. We're going to shift to our audience interaction portion of the program, Mr. Fisher, if that's
Great.
all right. So here, I'll check in with the audience one more time. How are we doing, everybody? Great. So if you have a question, and I should add, Mr. Fisher's been more than generous in saying he'll discuss any topic that we want. We'll take all questions. If you wouldn't mind, please raising your hand or standing up. Mr. Tilley's got a microphone. He'll come out and find you. If you're following along with us on the live stream, we would love to have your questions. You can tweet at us. We are at UNTDebate. That's at UNTDebate. No space, but there's plenty of space for you on our team. Like that?
I like that.
So if you got a question, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, and we'll come out there and help you. Yes, sir, in the blue shirt.
Hello, my name is Shane.
Hey, Shane.
I wanted to ask what policies you might advocate to tackle the problem of campaign corruption with large corporations and wealthy interests donating campaigns and doing pay-to-play and things of that nature.
Yes. Yeah, excellent question. Thank you. Shane, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I view there are, a couple significant challenges to our democracy. And number one is the existence of dark money in our campaigns. Number two would be gerrymandering, right? So you've asked about what I think is right up there at the top in terms of what are the biggest challenges that we face in terms of making sure we have a healthy democracy going forward. There's a problem. The problem is that the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United that for purposes of campaign donations, money, the spending of money is speech, and that corporations are people. Those are the two problematic decisions in that ruling. What does that mean? Well, under the First Amendment to the Constitution, it's not an absolute right. Free speech is not an absolute right. I mean, you can't get up and yell fire in a crowded theater, right? Well, political speech is the highest form of protected speech. So we've said this really, really protected form of speech, which can't be restricted unless the government's got just a really, really significant interest in doing that. It can't be restricted unless that's the case. But now we've said the spending of money by corporations is that form of protected speech. And this is a ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court. There's two ways to overcome that. One is to change the makeup of the Supreme Court and change that decision. I mean, who here thinks that's going to happen anytime soon, right? The other way is you amend the Constitution to say that for purposes of the First Amendment, corporations are not people and the spending of money isn't speech. And that's doable. It's doable. It's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen in 2020. But it requires us having a long-term strategy to get there. Adam Schiff has proposed an amendment to the Constitution. You can look it up. He's a representative from California. It's called the Schiff Amendment, to do exactly what I just said. And I support the Schiff Amendment. I also am committed to not taking dark money, making sure that we're holding ourselves to the standards that we want to impose on others. And we need to do that. But you know what it also means? It means we need to fund our campaigns, y'all. It means we can't sit back and say, those people taking super PAC money. You got to support your candidates. You got to make that $5, $10 donation, because it has to make up for the fact that the candidate you're supporting isn't taking super PAC money. Thanks for that question, though.
Thank you very much. Another question from the audience.
This is a little different question than we talked about earlier, and you addressed that, and I appreciate that. This has to do with a voucher system,
Okay.
And we are very divided in the country, and I think we're divided at the moment because of the income disparity. Now, when you take a school and the government provides vouchers to remove kids, but because there's not enough money, that requires more money from the parents, which essentially limits it to the rich. So you remove the kids from the wealthier families, and you leave the kids in the public schools from the less wealthy. Do you think we're in danger of actually creating a group in the country that is educated and therefore going to be more successful, and a group, I use the word peasant, but that's not exact, that's a little bit too harsh. Are you in danger of creating a permanent group that is not as well educated, and once you're there, you're kind of stuck?
Certainly, that's a great question, Bill. Certainly, that's a risk, right? If we continue down the same path that we are, which is if we go to this Betsy DeVos route of allowing the defunding of education through vouchers, which is only, again, vouchers are only possible for somebody who has resources. You're further exacerbating the inequality disparity in this country in terms of educational outcomes. If we continue to defund education. So there are several ifs in there, right? It means that we who support public education can stand up and say, no, we believe in investing in our populace. We're building a civilization here, after all. We believe in investing in our populace and doing that through public education. So, whether families continue to send their children to private school, that will continue to happen. Again, to be clear, I have no problem with people sending their kids to private school. I just have a problem with de-investing in our public schools to do it. So yes, I very much think that's a problem, one that we have to overcome through smart educational policy. Thanks for that question.
Thank you.
A couple down here.
See, I think we had a couple questions over here, yeah.
Hi, so speaking of Betsy DeVos, well first, I have a very simple question on context. So my question is, do you support affirmative action? And the reason I ask that is because we have now a Department of Education and a Department of Justice who have both pretty much seemingly abdicated their responsibility to protect the most marginalized in our education system. Whereas Congress historically has had the opportunity to offset that through things like the Civil Rights Act, Title IX, things like that. So the question, do you support affirmative action?
Yes, I do. And let me tell you why, but let me pick that apart a little bit. The conservatives and liberals often get cross on this conversation because we're actually talking about different things. So often conservatives hear affirmative action, they think quotas, right? And that's not what affirmative action is necessarily. Maybe if you were to overly simplify it, and it's certainly not the form of affirmative action that I want to see. I myself, if you look at my campaign staff, it's mostly women and women of color, and I've actually been accused of pandering to people, which is ridiculous. So let me tell you the way I approach that personally in my life, and how I think that should apply when it comes to affirmative action through education. What we need to be doing is finding, if we spot an area, let's say graduate students, we don't have enough graduate students that really reflect society. We need to be creating programs that offer opportunities for people of color or other, just to reflect society, to qualify for that program. That doesn't mean going out and saying, okay, we need to find, 4 Hispanics and 3 African Americans. That would be a quota system. But what I support is going out there and saying, okay, we have a problem. Our student body does not reflect society generally, so we need to be investing in opportunities for women and minorities to qualify for the program. Again, I talk a lot about investments because that's where I see the federal government's role being in that space. Does that answer your question? Good.
Mr. Fisher, I wonder if you'd mind if I relay a question from our Twitter followers.
Sounds great.
We've got some watching on our live stream, and Jackie Barrow has a question for you about alternative energy.
Great.
About alternative energy.
Hi, Jackie.
Yeah, well, she might be here with us. As she's asking, how are you going to bring more alternative energy to North Texas?
That's a good question. So I support, first of all, let's recognize that the future of energy in this world, if we have a future world, is alternative energy. It's green energy. So we need to be a leader as a country. We need to be a leader in this space. That means not backing out of things like the Paris Climate Accord. That means being a leader and developing technologies, developing industries. And I want to see us do that here in North Texas. I want to see us do that here in Denton. How do we do that? We invest in solar. Primarily, that's where I want to see investments because it's got huge upside. Solar has immense opportunities here in Texas. I want to see us invest in wind as well, but solar is really where I want to see us develop, invest in technologies and in industries here in North Texas. I don't know if you heard that the Trump administration imposed a 30% tariff on solar panels. It will put Americans out of work. It will put hardworking families on unemployment. It's foolish. It's foolish and lack of leadership. So I want to see us do the exact opposite. Let's make sure that companies that are willing to engage in this space and put some risk out there, the entrepreneurs who are willing to say, you know what, I'll give this a chance to see if I can develop this new technology. Let's make sure that they have some tax credits to incentivize them. You know, I come up here, I haven't mentioned his name yet. I'm running against Michael Burgess. He comes up here every year. He comes up here every year and he holds an alternative energy summit. And I sat right behind him when he was here back in, when was it? July? August? I sat right behind him. And his approach on all these issues is to talk about how you should buy a hybrid and talk about how you should change the windows in your homes. He doesn't talk once, and he's voted several times against tax incentives for alternative energy development. So he views this as an issue that we should approach on an individual basis. How many here have the $70,000, $50,000, I don't know what it costs to go out and buy a hybrid? I'm not going to raise my hand because I don't. So how is that the answer? No, the answer is as a society, as a community, we need to tackle this problem. And the federal government has a role to play, which is to incentivize. Incentivize through tax credits and other incentives to allow people to make those changes, to buy those kind of hybrids and change the windows in their homes, but also as a community to develop alternative energy technologies. And so that's a stark difference between me and my opponent.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. If I might, just to add a follow-up, since
Please.
you raised the current incumbent, I'm going to ask another opinion question. Do you believe that we are facing a changing global climate and that there is human influence on that?
No, because it's not a matter of belief. I got asked in that event that I went to where I was seeing, that question was asked, and I almost had a hard time. How do you believe? I don't even know how to answer that question. You don't believe data. You don't decide whether to believe data. Science is real. So I as an attorney, I give advice to my client, and generally they don't question me, I don't know enough about climate science myself to say, I'm smart enough, I can just make up my own decision about this, whether it's true or not. No. What I do say is I believe climatologists, and I believe experts. And we can't live in a post-fact, post-expertise society any longer. It's not healthy. And so I do believe climatologists who say, yes, climate change is real, it's happening, and that it's influenced by human activity.
All right. Thank you very much. Do we have another question from our audience members?
Hello, Mr. Fisher. This question actually comes from our Facebook page. Question, is there a cost-effective way to bring books back? I recently heard an excellent point that many lower-income families may lack the computer and internet tools for their children to use the online classroom effectively. How can we support those students?
It's a great question, and the answer is no, we invest in them. We invest in them to make sure that there's broadband available. I want to see rural broadband. That means, maybe you don't realize, maybe some of you do who are from rural areas, there are areas where broadband is slow or inaccessible. And how are we supposed to have a 21st century economy, 21st century students, where that's the case? So we need to make sure that broadband is available. I want to see municipal broadband if possible. Okay, so make sure that every student has that available, particularly if that's an important part of their education. If their education is being made available through the internet, we as a community need to make sure that students like that have access to the internet at home. And then the technology as well. That's just a matter of investment. The school I go to, the school that my children go to, provides that technology. Well, it just so happens, I don't live in Highland Park, I live in Flower Mound, which the tax revenue is enough to make sure that the school has those resources. So that goes back to the conversation earlier, how do we fund that gap? We need to figure out how to fund that gap, but I believe that is our responsibility as a society to make sure that the next generation, regardless of the resources that their parents have or the size of the homes around their school, that they have the same resources as everyone else. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll return to Twitter for another question we're being asked. Pat D on Twitter reminds us that 2 of the other women in this race are women, your opponent in the Democratic primary and Mr. Burgess's challenger, and asks the question, why are you the best candidate for women in Texas's 26th?
Great question. Oh, turn it off. Oh. Hello? All right. That's a good question. Pat, I'm a feminist. I'm a proud feminist. What that means to me is that I believe in equality. Equality of opportunity, equality of resources, equality of healthcare rights. There are attempts by Austin to try and exercise control over women's bodies. I don't support that. I'm proudly pro-choice. I've been endorsed by Wendy Davis. I've been endorsed by Vote Pro-Choice because of my positions on this. So, why am I the best advocate for women? Why am I the best candidate for women?
Yes, sir.
Because I'm the best advocate for women's rights. Thank you.
Very good, very good. We have another question from our audience members here tonight.
So, if the Democratic Party is to win and generate excitement in new voters, it's widely believed that we're going to have to inspire millennials, young college students, and get them involved in the process. Of the candidates that are on the ballot for the Democratic primary, you're the one that actually came tonight to talk to university students. Can we interpret that as as a more intense dedication to respecting the opinions of young people?
Well, I won't try and insinuate what other candidates do or feel or say. I'll listen to what they say. I'll watch what they do. But I can assure you that I'm committed to listening to everyone. So what does that mean? That means going where everyone is. That means being here on campus. That means the amazing experience I had on Sunday with the Hamilton Chapel Baptist Church. That means being in every corner of the district, and that's what I've done. To the extent you follow me, you'll see that I'm everywhere. And I do it from the time I get up in the morning till the time my head hits the pillow at night. Because what this district lacks is somebody who wants to represent the people of the district. We have a representative who does what his big donors want him to do. He's really good at it. I mean, he just, writing the check, he signed off on the bill to allow your internet service provider to sell your personal data, your search history. Why? Oh, because he got a bunch of money from telecom. So what this district lacks is someone who wants to listen to everyone and represent everyone. And that's what I've done, is make myself available, and that's why I'm here tonight. I hope that the residents of this district recognize that. Don't throw away your shot. Don't throw away an opportunity in 2018 to flip this district. I'm going to toot my horn a little bit. Go back and look at history in this district. When has someone with experience, skill, and the ability to legislate run for this office against Michael Burgess? It hasn't happened. So what I'm asking you to do is to lay it all on the line with me. We are seeing districts, precincts in other states flip 30-point swings. So don't tell me that this isn't possible. Yeah. This is so doable. If we will get out from behind Facebook, sorry, Tara, knock the doors, talk to your neighbors, and when you vote, you better drag 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 people with you. And it will happen.
I hate to ask more on strategy with an upcoming election, but
sounds fun.
One of our Twitter followers is asking, given the history of this district and the history of Texas, and this district formed in after the 1980 census, it's been Republican for a very long time here. How can Democrats win in this district and in the larger area of Texas? We have a lot of seats coming up in this midterm.
Demographics are changing. People are more engaged. But those are just helpful things. Here's what really matters. People are so done. People are so done. We've been watching this just government that drags along, that takes advantage of its citizens for years now, right? I mean, that didn't start with Donald Trump, everybody. Sorry to break it to you. That didn't start with Donald Trump. But what happened on November 8, 2016? We all fell off a cliff. We're done. And people are tired of waking up in the morning feeling the anxiety of what's going to be on CNN. You want to be able to go back to going to watch football on Sundays. But there's too much social anxiety, there's too much cultural anxiety with what is this government going to do to Latinos next? What's this government going to do to women next? And people are ready to fight for representative democracy. And that's what's different.
Another question from our audience here.
Hey, Will.
Hey.
So recently we saw that the FCC repealed net neutrality, right?
Uh-huh.
A couple questions. First is, what is your stance on that? And second is, do you agree with that repeal?
Yeah, so I'm a big supporter of net neutrality. And let me tell you why.
Yes.
Not only that, but we rallied for net neutrality. We played video games. Let's bring it, raise some money. We have a world that is increasingly connected by technology. I mean, that can't be ignored at this point. Access to information necessarily runs through the internet today. So playing with that and creating inequality in terms of access to that is not smart. When people are so connected, when businesses are connected, small businesses, when their ability to compete depends on access to the internet, creating different levels of speeds, availability of that information at different rates is scary. It's not smart. It's not sound public policy. On top of that, it's bad politics. I mean, who here loves their cable company? I mean, and that's what the FCC just did. They just told your ISP that it can now behave like a cable company. So, when guys come around selling cable to your house and they give you that brochure that's like this big, and it's like, oh, the sports package, this package and this. that's what the internet could be without net neutrality, right? That's terrible politics, because everybody in this room uses the internet. Every voter uses the internet. So why do we rally for net neutrality? Because there are a lot of people who don't get engaged in politics who realize how important this issue is to them. So we had people come out to this event that are not politically engaged, but they are, and they will be, because of net neutrality. So this was stupid. Stupid public policy, stupid politics. But, you know, we don't really have a genius in chief. Well, he's a stable genius. Let's not forget that.
I think we have another question from the middle of the audience. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
So a little over a week ago, we saw that the congressional Democratic leadership capitulated to Paul Ryan and the Republican establishment by granting NSA warrantless surveillance powers going into 2023. Democrats, if they consolidated their power, would have had enough votes with Libertarian Republicans to prevent this from happening. As a congressman, will you follow in the footsteps of people like Michael Burgess and Beto O'Rourke in preventing warrantless surveillance from continuing in the future?
Thanks. Great question. And it's one that disappoints me when you look at Democratic leadership. Because this is not an area where I would hold up Democratic leaders and say, this is who I would exemplify. We should not be allowing the NSA to spy on Americans unless there's a warrant for a wiretap. That has to go through the judicial process. I understand that after 9/11 there was a lot of fear, and there still is. But are we willing to give up basic rights to privacy because of that fear? I don't think that's rational. So no, what you can expect from me is someone who will stand up and say, no, we don't just turn over American privacy to the NSA. I want to make sure that going forward we continue to respect the Constitution. We are a nation of laws, and the rule of law is one of the most important values that our founders brought into our system. And so I find warrantless wiretaps to be negating to the ideas of the rule of law. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have a couple more questions from our audience members here tonight.
I'm good.
If that's all right, we'll keep them rolling.
Keep them rolling.
All right.
I'll never shut this down.
Hey, Will, if I could go back to education for a minute, you had mentioned the issue that U.S. public education isn't comparing to other countries, which I couldn't agree more with. And you mentioned increasing funding. What I'm curious about is if you think that that's the only thing that's missing, and if not, what else needs to be done to improve public education?
No, that's a great question. Funding is where I focus because it's the most glaring issue. I would like to see us do take a look at a couple things. First of all, I want to make sure we expand pre-K. Pre-K should be universal. I'm fine with opt-outs for parents that want to opt out, but it should be universally available. We can look at some of our Scandinavian friends and look at some of the interesting things that are going on there. Some length of the school day issues and the amount of play versus study time. But the problem is these things are hard to look at and even study because the financial interests are so baked in. The financial interests through the lack of campaign finance reform. So it's something that we're going to have to really battle at because basically we're battling financial interests within the current system. Financial interests often don't want to see things change because they've made decisions based on the system being static, meaning they've hedged a bet. So when an investor makes an investment decision, they're looking at risk, right? So they don't want to see that system change because they've already evaluated risk in the system. So what I want to see us do is look to some of our neighbors, look to other educational systems and see what is being successful, and then we're going to have to fight to make some changes. And that fight is going to have to be a fight against campaign finance, dark money, a fight for campaign finance reform, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher.
Yeah.
Since we've returned to the topic of education, one of our Twitter followers, our own Gabe Murillo, you brought up the issue of Title I funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you know that this federal funding comes with several conditions or strings attached to it.
Exactly.
Given evidence that the zero tolerance policies that are often conditions have by many been called to enhance the so-called school-to-prison pipeline, what do you think the federal role is in assuring disciplinary policy is not abused? Zero tolerance policy being one of the strings attached to Title I funding. There are several of these.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, we need to be willing to look at those strings and see where we need to snip them, because local schools know their students best. And they know where should maybe a zero tolerance policy apply for a student, you know, or where shouldn't it? And so I want to make sure that schools have that flexibility. I don't like tying funding to these types of conditions, because the truth is we underfund public schools. So maybe if we were just, you know, let's say we're just fully funding public schools, then maybe we could start to look at, okay, where are some, you know, strings that we can attach to maybe try and drive public policy, because that's everybody has great intentions. When they put these strings in place, they have great intentions of trying to steer public policy through funding. But let's first make sure that we're bringing up the funding to the level it should be at before we are imposing those kinds of strings. The school-to-prison pipeline is a significant problem in this country. We are filling up prisons, often private prisons, which I'm also opposed to, by underfunding kids' education, underinvesting in kids, and giving them very few options and opportunities. And mostly it's in communities of color where we're also underinvesting in a myriad of other ways. So I want to make sure first, let's bring up the quality of education to what it should be. Let's give those vocational opportunities. Let's make sure students feel that they have lots of options, that the only option isn't, well, I didn't do well enough to go to college, so that's kind of it. Because that's how a lot of students feel. And that's hopelessness. And so, yeah, somebody's going to make some poor choices when they're feeling hopeless. You better believe it. And they will turn to whatever other avenues are made available by the society that they are in. And a lot of times that may be illegal behavior. So let's make sure that we are creating scenarios and communities where they can make smart decisions, good decisions, and have a lot of options to achieve the American dream. So that's apprenticeships, vocational programs, and just increasing the funding of education overall.
With your, thank you very much, thank you. With your permission, we'll stay on the same topic. While you were answering that, we have another question from one of our Twitter followers that has to do with the old debate over stringing over sex education or abstinence education. Micah tweets to us that according to the Texas Tribune, a quarter of Texas schools no longer teach sex education. Do you support district-level decisions to curb or eliminate sex ed?
No.
Oh, okay.
This is one area where I'm happy to have a string attached. You better be teaching science-based education to students. How are we to expect students to make smart decisions about their sexuality when we're not teaching them true, science-based information? So I want to make sure that we're arming our students with the information that they need to be able to make smart decisions. Since the dawn of time. What was that cough about? I'll just leave it there, all right? So there are certain realities of life, and we can bang our heads against the wall and wish and hope that those realities go away. They don't. What we need to do is make sure that students have the tools, the information that they need to make smart decisions.
Thank you very much. I have to follow up on that particular question. Does that mean you would be in favor of the current ruling party, as you described, supporting an abstinence-only sex education attachment to Title I funding? Something we've had in the past.
No. No, because abstinence only does not reflect data. Abstinence-only education leads to further unwanted pregnancies. So what's the goal? Is the goal to have unwanted pregnancies? Then you better believe it. That is the right way to go. I don't think that's the goal. The goal is to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. So let's follow the data. Let's follow the science. That means making sure it's science-based health curriculum.
A fair comment. I hope the goal is education.
Yeah.
Yes. Another question from the audience.
So you talked earlier about not throwing away your shot and the importance of voting.
Yeah.
With a polling location added to the UNT campus,
Yes.
why should we register to vote here? Why should we vote where we go to school? We're only here 9 months.
Yeah. The truth is many students end up staying in the location that they are educated. Many do, a lot do. And while you're here, decisions are made that affect you, that affect your quality of life, that affect your education, and frankly, that affect your alma mater. And if that's something that matters to you, you want to make sure that you're voting for representatives who reflect your values. Moreover, most students who say, well, I'm going to go back to San Antonio to vote. I'm going to go back to, wherever to vote. They don't. And so they just don't vote. Your vote is your voice. And if you don't vote where you go to school, you often don't vote, and you don't have a say in what happens to your community where you live. So please get registered. If you're not registered by February 5th, you can't vote in the Democratic Party. It means you can't vote for me. That's sad. So get registered and go vote in the Democratic primary. And we have a registrar right down here. 2.
Thank you for coming tonight.
And she will stick around as late as need be. Right, Nikki, right. Oh, terrible cigarette.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of more questions from our audience members.
All right, so not since Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton has there been so much political divisiveness. How would you heal the divide between Republicans and Democrats and get to a point where we had Tip O'Neill working with Ronald Reagan?
Excellent question. So there are a lot of reasons for the divisiveness in this country. I have some kind of out-of-the-box thoughts about how to approach that. Preaching isn't going to do it. Preaching that people need to work together isn't going to. We have to think structurally because we are all actors within a system, and so we need to think what are the systematic things that are going on that is causing divisiveness. And it's not just the human heart's turned black, No, it's that there are actors within our system that are driving a wedge. Who benefits from wedges being driven into society? The media. And I'm not going to throw the media, I'm not going to, fake news, CNN. No, but the truth is that when there is divisiveness, it leads to ratings, it leads to drama, and it leads to money. And so what I want to see us do is enact a 21st century fairness doctrine and apply it initially to cable news. Who here knows what the fairness doctrine was? So just real quickly, was an idea that was I guess, gotten rid of. That's not the technical term. Sorry. Thank you. He's helpful. In the 80s by the Reagan administration.
Yes,
but what it said was that broadcast news had to basically kind of give equal time to differing opinions. How great would it be if Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, whatever they are, kind of crazy, had to give equal time to differing opinions? That person who sits in their home all day with that one channel on, hearing that one viewpoint, being told it's news, I mean, it's a corrupting influence on a person. It really is. So I want to make sure that person is hearing both sides of an argument. And I truly think, Michael, that this has a chance to moderate some positions. And to the extent we can grow that moderated mind, that mind that's willing to admit that, that's one view of it, and I need to be able to understand the other view. Maybe I don't agree with it, but I can understand it, I can see where it's coming from. To the extent we can do that, I think we get closer to achieving that goal of bringing people back closer together. That's one thought I have on that. But, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
last audience question, ladies and gentlemen.
My name is Kate,
Okay.
and I'm a retired nurse. And
Thank you.
so obviously I'm concerned about healthcare. But I've been reading, and I know from my own experience, that the rural communities in the state of Texas suffer greatly from the lack of healthcare. This past weekend there was an article about Lamesa, Texas. My mother was born there, and I still have family there. They've lost their hospital. They've lost their delivery, labor and delivery service.
That's awesome.
And there are areas of Texas that we all know that don't have physicians. We need nurses that have the higher educational training, advanced nurse practitioners that can serve in those areas. I'm concerned because just recently, in the last week or so, we have now the conscious and religious freedom division in the HHS that potentially could allow people to be denied health care services for moral reasons.
Right, yeah, I saw that.
As a nurse who grew up in a small Kansas town, I can't even imagine this. I was there in the AIDS epidemic. I've worked in a Catholic hospital where we had molar pregnancies that would require suction D and Cs because that's how a mother would live. There is such division in this country about health care, and yet we need it so badly. I'm wondering how, because Representative Burgess is going to say he's representing the health care of this country. How do you say something in support of yourself and in support of health care?
Thanks, Kate, and I share your concerns. There's nothing that impacts a person's life more than getting ill and potentially losing your job because of it, or going bankrupt, let alone losing your life, losing a mother, losing a child. I believe that we, as Americans, should have the value of taking care of our communities, of taking care of our neighbors. I was raised to believe that you truly should seek to love your neighbor, not just on Sunday. Healthcare costs are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in this country. We should be ashamed. Michael Burgess should be ashamed. But he's not. He goes to bed at night and tells himself this story that, oh, choice and freedom of choice, that's the real value here, that's the real goal. Well, you keep telling yourself that while children are dying, while women are being denied the health care that they need, while families are going bankrupt. It's inexcusable. We need to fight to ensure that every single American has the health care that they need, when and where they need it, and it's past damn time that we did it. Now, there are folks maybe listening online or here saying, oh, he just wants to tax us a bunch. We already pay the highest per capita cost of healthcare than any other industrialized country. So we're already paying it. We're paying it in a really inefficient way. We can actually reduce what people pay for healthcare in this country and cover everyone. And I know that that thought gets a little complex for some people. But if we will follow the data, it's true. We pay for healthcare through a myriad of ways, through insurance, through premium, through deductible, through copay. It's still incredibly expensive. The problem is not everybody's covered. So when someone who doesn't have coverage gets sick, gets the flu, they go to the emergency room. That's expensive. They don't pay it. It gets written off. And who pays for that to keep that hospital open? Everybody else. So we're just increasing the cost of healthcare in this country through the system that we have. By first covering everyone, condensing the way that we pay for healthcare by paying for it through taxes, we can reduce the cost of healthcare in this country by at least a third. At least. And why do I say at least a third? Because our per capita cost of care in this country is $9,800. That's the most recent data that I have. The next on the list, the next one jumps down to like $6,700. I think it's Germany or Switzerland. If you go all the way to Canada, Canada has a private provider like us, but single payer universal system. Per capita cost of care is $4,400. So I don't care if I pay a little bit more in taxes. If I'm not paying, I'll pay this much more in taxes, but I'm not paying this in premium. Like, who cares how you pay it if you're paying less and everyone's getting coverage and the coverage is great? Now you'll hear the naysayers on Fox News talk about all those lines in Canada. Go actually look at it. They have a problem with waiting times for non-emergency, non-necessary procedures, but it's a problem that they can fix. And experts within their system say it's not inherent to our system. It's a problem within our system that we can fix, and it can be fixed through having universally available waiting lists. So let's say you're waiting for a hip surgery, and that one doctor you're going to has a waiting list of 8 months. Well, in the system, there are other people who can perform that same thing that don't have a waiting list. And this is available information. So they're working on that, on trying to expand the availability of wait lists so that you can, I'm not going to go see that doctor, so I don't want to wait 8 months. I'll go down the road to that one where it's, a couple weeks. So if somebody comes at you with the wait list argument, it's not a good reason. It's not a good argument in and of itself, and it's certainly not a good reason to not fight to make sure that everyone is covered in this country. So I'm with you, Kate. I'm with you. And I've committed, and I'll continue to commit, that if this ends up being me in Congress for 2 years, but I fought and achieved universal health care in this country, totally worth it. And I would do it again.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And thank you for being so generous with all the variety of questions, and in a very uncharacteristic move for many politicians, you actually stayed on topic for all of our questions tonight.
Oh my gosh.
We appreciate that. Thank you. I think that we have covered most of the important issues for your agenda, but I didn't want to leave without giving you an opportunity for some concluding remarks, sir. So anything you'd like to add at the very end of this wonderful discussion?
That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. You participating, you being interested enough to come and listen for an hour and a half to somebody blather on about education policy. That's meaningful. It's a sign that 2018 is turning out to be what could be a monumental year for us. And 2018 matters more than maybe another political year has ever mattered in this country. Now, I'm only 37 years old, so I've got a limited history to base that on. But I am a student of history. There has not been another time where we are so divided that didn't lead to a civil war. Put that through your thought process a little bit. 2018 is important because it's a year that we have to stand up and say, we do not agree and we do not accept, we reject the style of politics that currently governs our system. And the only way you change that is through electoral advocacy. Raising signs at protests is helpful. Putting your thoughts on Facebook is helpful. But what makes change is voting and getting more people to the polls. So what I want to encourage you to do, if you want to take this country back from the people who are currently running into the ground, back from the Trumps, back from the Putins, back from the Burgesses and the Bannons, you have to go to the polls. And you have to vote for people that inspire you and that represent your values. And you have to take a busload of people there with you. The way you can do that is by volunteering. You can donate. You can get involved in a campaign. Right now, we have volunteers today who are out knocking doors. Tomorrow we'll be out knocking doors. This weekend we'll be out knocking doors and telling people and voters in this district that they have a true opportunity in 2018 to make a difference. So I invite you, I challenge you, each one of you in this room. How much time are you willing to set aside to save our democracy? How much time? An hour a week? I'll take it. 2 hours a week? I'll take it. There are people in this room who are donating 20 hours a week. That's how much this matters. It matters to each one of us. It matters to me. I've donated my next 2 years. Well, it's going to be 2 years, sorry, not next year. It'll be almost 2 years from when I first started this process to make sure that we give ourselves the best shot in 2018. So join me. Join us. Well, we have our volunteer coordinators here to help you get signed up, to help. Come join us and make 2018 a record year to send Michael Burgess into retirement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I have just a few tasks left this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say my thanks to Mr. Will Fisher and the Fisher campaign for being so generous with their time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
I'd also like to say a special word of thanks to the UNTDebate team and especially Mr. Gabe Marilla, who put all this together over there. Gabe, thank you. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank you, our audience members here and on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a very important decision to make coming up ahead. And actually, I'm a history buff myself. We have 37,000 students here at the University of North Texas. And did you know that in the first contested election of this district, that would have been enough to swing the margin? That the election between Representative Vandergriff and what became Representative Dick Armey. So get out there and vote, UNT students. February 5th is the last day to register to vote. You might want to mark your calendars if you're looking about that. Early voting begins on February 20th. The primary is March the 6th, where Mr. Fisher and other candidates will be looking for your vote for their individual party nominations. And our general election heads off November 6th of this coming fall. Be a part in our democracy. Be a part here. Thank you for joining UNTDebate in this presentation of a town hall on education. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.